Good morning. My name is Donna Marie Collins. I am the hearing examiner that will be presiding over this morning's zoning case, which is a CPD, which represents an expansion of the Gasparilla marine sales business. All testimony and evidence that I take during these hearings must be taken in under oath, so I will administer the oath to everyone in the room at the conclusion of my remarks. I am not the final decision maker in this case. There will be a second hearing before the Board of County Commissioners in a few weeks following the issuance of my recommendation. I anticipate having this recommendation out in a fairly short period of time as I'm caught up with my work and I can turn my attention to this right away. Since there's no members of the public and I see the players here are familiar with our process, I'm going to go right to administering the oath and eliminate my other remarks regarding the way the proceeding will be. So if you will please raise your right hand if you intend on speaking on the record. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you present into the record will be the truth?
Yes.
I do. Yes. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner, staff, fellow applicants. Greg Stewart, for the record. I've been qualified in this hearing examiner office as an expert in comprehensive urban regional planning, zoning, urban design, and real estate land development. So I'd like my testimony to be considered as an expert.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. In terms of the exhibits, consistent with the exhibit list, resume of Joss Eisenoff, who may or may not be testifying, a paper copy of the PDF presentation slideshow, and then a response letter pertaining to the disputed issue relating to intensity request. And attached to that will be an actual copy of the application for public hearing relating to the intensity request.
If I can, just the dispute.
Okay.
You have that.
Just the use.
Yep.
Was that dispute letter part of the 48-hour?
Yes. Well, the dispute, or response to the dispute, no, we just identified the dispute.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm ready for, this is a paper copy of your PowerPoint.
Yes.
All right, that's applicant exhibit 2. 3 is the response letter.
Oops. Along with.
And then the last thing is an application, or is that the attachment to
It's an
that?
attachment to the response.
Anything else?
No.
Okay.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I'd like to present the CPD request. The graphic in front of you, and I want to point this out, it shows in heavy border the actual request, which is approximately 4.5 acres. But I want to point out it's an expansion to the existing facility that's approximately 1.2 acres. It's that triangular shaped piece that fronts US 41. So the zoning request is for, again, to rezone an RS1 zoned property that is approximately 4.56 acres. The intent is to support boat sales, service, display, marine parts, that type of thing, to expand the existing Gasparilla marine sales that is, again, located east and accommodates approximately 1.2 acres. We agree with all the staff findings and recommendations and conditions pertaining not only to the project but also to the deviations. The disputed issue is the 131,400 square feet of intensity, and I believe that's just it's a misinterpretation, and we have our experts here to walk you through where that 131,000 square feet comes from, we are requesting 35,000 square feet of goods and commercial goods and services. The graphic in front of you.
Are you amending your request to 35,000?
No, the request, it has always been for 35,000 square feet, and I'll get into how staff misinterpreted that to 131,000.
Well, the request says 131.4.
No, that's not correct.
So the request should be 35,000?
Correct, and that's consistent with the dispute letter on Catrone and Associates letterhead with the attachment, which
And I
is.
haven't seen that yet because it wasn't submitted as part of the 48 hours. So you're going to have to put in testimony on that. I just want to make sure I understand at the outset that the request is amended to limit commercial square footage to 3,500
Yes.
square feet.
Well, I would suggest amendment is the wrong term. It has always been 35,000 square feet.
Oh, right, a correction to the request.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Welcome. The graphic in front of you shows the subject property. It's part of the old Mariana Platte subdivision. It consists of 4 platted lots. Basically lot 54, which is the furthest west, 55, 56, and 57. I point this out because what is relevant to the case in front of you are the 2 easternmost lots, lot 56 and 57, because that is where we're going to be going forward with the actual boat sales and display as part of the initial development. The western lots 54 and 55 are in reserve as future development. When I get into the discussion pertaining to the master concept plan, I'll show you how that plays out with regard to native open space, surface water management, buffering, and the like. But again, as I get into the presentation, the 2 easternmost lots, 56 and 57, are very pertinent and germane to the application. We request 6 deviations. Staff has agreed with the deviations with conditions. We appreciate staff's findings on that, and we have no qualms with that.
So what is the square footage that's going to be on lots 56 and 57?
The total requested, well, okay, actually, for 56 and 57, approximately 8,000 square feet, and that'll be comprised of 3 buildings. And again, I'll get into the master concept plan. The balance is being held in reserve for possible future expansion, and or if they don't need lots 54 and 55, they'll just sell it. And again, I'll walk you through that, Madam Hearing Examiner, as we get into the master concept.
So it'll be sold with the entitlement of 27,000 square feet of commercial use?
Yeah, possibly, because they really are not sure. They may want to hold on to it because their business has been going great.
Right.
And so they just wanted to entitle, with the concept being that, hey, if we do want to sell it, we're building some value, and then the next person comes in with a CPD amendment or, whatever process is needed at that point in time. We do comply with the various code sections, for example, with your decision-making authority, 145D4. When we look at the codes, application of master concept plan criterion 34373A, it is a minor CPD, so we're consistent with 34341-2, and also the general design standards relating to the master concept plan itself, 34411. Now, I do want to also point out that we're consistent. This is in the mixed-use overlay, so we're consistent with a policy 1121 and the LDC code section 1042 that implements that. Because of the primary uses, the display and sales of boats, we have to comply with 341352, which we do, so that's another section of the code that we're consistent with. And then finally, we are in the North Fort Myers planning community, so we're subject to the various rules and standards in Division 33. So, for example, 3315 32, the community review, we actually went in front of them twice, and we have full community support. And then there are various standards and goals and policies, so we're consistent across the board, and that's something in the staff report that's reflected in their findings and recommendations. The next page shows the location. Again, it is in the North Fort Myers planning community. It's basically north of Pondella on the west side of US 41. It adjoins Judd Road. Evergreen Road is to the south. Brown Road is to the west. We have approximately 325 feet of frontage on Judd, 697 feet on Evergreen, and approximately 172 frontage feet on Brown Road. This is very unique to the site, because if you look on the graphic to the right, we are in intensive development with the mixed-use overlay. Immediately to the west, on opposite of Brown Road, it's outlying suburban. So we have various zonings and land uses. For example, on the north side of the property, it's zoned CC, it's Northern Tools and Equipment. As I pointed out earlier, to the east is zoned CPD to support the existing facility. Along Evergreen, on the southeastern portion of Evergreen, it's the CPD. You have medical, a veterinarian office, that type of thing. Now, as you transition westward on Evergreen, then you get into the old Charlize, if I pronounce it right, Charlize subdivision, which is residential, RS1, and then also large lot agricultural residential uses. Then further to the west along Evergreen on the south side, you have the Judd, it's either, I think it's a community park, but you have the community park. And then finally, when you look at the interface between Brown Road and the property, the east side of Brown Road is more or less commercial. It has a number of light industrial, restaurant, that type of thing, those types of uses. And yet on the west side of Brown, it's vacant ag, and then also as you go further north, you have residential uses that are also zone ag. So you have a different combination of uses and land uses that are that shape the buffering, and I'll walk you through the buffering.
All right, and just to correct you, it's sub-outlying suburban.
Oh, did I say outlying suburban?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Sub-outlying suburban for the record. Okay, thank you. As per the code, we have to document available utilities and services. Lee County Utility provides potable water. Florida Governmental Utility is sanitary sewer as part of your package and accepted as exhibits. We have service availability letters for that. The property, in terms of transportation, we have indirect access to US 41 vis-a-vis Judd and Evergreen. The first phase, as I mentioned, lots 56 and 57 is direct access onto Judd. The future, if there is a future expansion, and that lots 54 and 55 are sold, then they would have direct access to Evergreen. If those lots are not sold and retained, then there'll just be an internal connection. So if Gasparilla Marine Sales ultimately uses all the property, then the sole access will be along Judd. Documentation is provided that we have adequate emergency fire safety, sheriff services. The graphic in front of you shows, we are located well within a 1.15 mile service radius for sheriff, fire, and EMS. So we agree with staff that there are adequate utilities and services as per the staff report on page 5. The next slide deals with the environmental site conditions and character. Succinctly, the subject properties, lot 56 and 57 has historically been used for residential, so it's very disturbed. It's approximately 1.2 acres, so it's a flux 110. The west of lots 54 and 55, consist of exotic invaded mixed forests, specifically flux 427 and then 450. We have a number of native trees, heritage trees, pine, palm, oak. The graphic to the right shows the tree survey. The tree survey helped shape the design of the master concept plan. As the graphic shows, there's approximately 73 oak, pine, and palm tree species on site. The CPD preserves 6 out of 7 large oak clusters. In addition, we're saving 4 additional 12 to 20 inch oak trees. The project preserves 45 12-inch and above pine, palm, and oak, and the project substantially preserves all the heritage trees as defined by the code as 20 inches and above. With regard to surface water, the property is high and dry. There are no wetlands or flowways. The graphic to the right demonstrates that the property is outside of the 100-year floodplain with the exception of a little bubble along the evergreen right-of-way, and I believe that's just from spillover from an unmaintained swale, but the bottom line is 97% of the site is outside of the 100-year flood. Now, the master concept plan, as I pointed out, we're really looking at primarily lots 56 and 57, which is around 2.58 acres, and that's for the boat sales display, boat part storage, repair group, public warehouse, that type of thing. The western lots consist of 1.98 acres. The use schedule is broad. It is requesting business services, healthcare facilities, warehousing, along with the boat-related sales, service, repairs.
Where's the public warehouse on?
Well, the public warehouse would be in the western lot 54 and 55.
Can you point to where it is on the site plan?
Lots 54 and 55. May I walk?
No, the public warehouse.
Well,
You
it's,
said that the square footage for the 2 eastern
you know,
lots
I actually,
public warehouse.
that's a good point. That is a typo. That should have been a private warehouse for lots 56 and 57, not a public warehouse.
So we're still capping building space at 8,000?
Yes, yes, and on lots, for the record, for lots 56 and 57s, it would be a private warehouse to store boat engines and miscellaneous parts, not public, so that is a typo. The next slide relates to the actual master concept plan use areas. The first phase I've already discussed. The boat service barn and staging area is immediately to the west of the parking lot. The parking lot relates to an existing single-family home. We're going to convert and readapt that home to support administrative uses, part sales, that type of thing. The gray the gray barn to the south, that's more or less adjacent to Evergreen, that is going to be an ancillary barn to be used for motor storage, boat motor storage, that type of thing. Anything that doesn't relate to the actual boat service boat barn area will be stored in the building to the south. And what we are doing with the building to the south, there used to be an old barn. We have gotten a demolition permit. We've knocked that down. So we're using that existing foundation as the footprint for the barn. And then what we're doing is showing if it needs to be expanded, it'll be expanded to the north away from Evergreen. So that's where that dark line is, but we are using the existing footprint. The lots 54 and 55 will be where the common surface water management area is, and also the 0.47 native open space tract will be. We will be putting that in as part of the initial phase of development. In fact, the project is under review as we speak for development order. So the western 2 lots will be accommodating the essential surface water management infrastructure and the native open space. Also, the graphic shows the potential interconnect if, in fact, my client does not sell the western 2 lots. So that's where the interconnect will be, and then that relates to the sole access on Judd Road. The next slide shows the single-family home conversion. It shows the first phase general boat parts storage, and then it shows the service barn area.
So is the north boat service barn going to be a new structure?
Yes, the first phase boat service barn will be a metal, pre-manufactured building.
And then on the south side, the lower portion of that building will be indoor storage?
Yes, concrete, probably CBS block structure. And then
Right now, there's nothing, there's just a pad there.
just a pad, that's correct. Now, I would like to walk you through this because and this slide pertains to buffering. I would like to walk you through this because, again, you have different land uses, different standards. You have the 1352 standard. We are requesting a deviation, so if I can just take a little bit of time, because it is a rather complicated buffering. What the slide shows, from letter A through letter J is the various standards. So starting with A, that's coincident with the single-family home, we are requesting a deviation from 1352. 1352 requires a 25-foot buffer with a sloped berm with landscaping. Because we want to preserve and restore the single-family home, and the single-family home is set back 28 feet from the right-of-way, it's impossible to meet that standard, the 25-foot standard. So the deviation is requesting a type D right-of-way buffer. That is deviation 5. So that is really the only area that does not comply with 1352 and not getting into variance hardships because this is a deviation, but the hardship is that the 28-foot setback from the single-family home to the right-of-way. Number B is the area in front of the display, and again, that conforms with 1352, the 25-foot buffer, sloped berm, massive plantings. C is the same 1352 buffer. When you get into D, we're requesting a 25-foot type D right-of-way buffer. Now, this is for the actual boat storage area. We're preserving a native palm. The buffer also includes on its northern edge 34005B1 screening. I believe that's 8 foot. So you'll have a 25-foot buffer, type D, with screening. I would like to point out that not only with D, but E, F, and I and J, because we are in the mixed-use overlay, we did have the option of doing reduced buffers, but we're not availing ourselves to that. We want to do a really bang-up job. We respect the evergreen residential areas, so we're putting in, again, with D, with E, type D buffers. With E, as the graphic shows, the mixed use, I believe, 5 trees per 100 linear feet, 10 feet. But again, we're going with 15 feet, double hedge, 5 trees per 100 linear feet. And so that's the same not only with E, but with F. So we are above the code standards when you look at the mixed use overlay standard. G, now that relates to 1430 Brown Street. In my letter, I would like either a specific condition or a request and understanding. It's my understanding that 1430 Brown Street has submitted an application for conventional commercial rezoning. The master concept plan is designed for a type C commercial to residential buffer with a screening wall. So I just want to make sure that if in fact the Brown Road conventional zoning goes forward and then we have a commercial to commercial, we would like to be able to reduce the buffer to a standard type A commercial to commercial without having to go back into a formal either hearing process because we're reducing a buffer or an administrative amendment process. So that is the basis for our request, that if Brown Street, the 1430 Brown Street is rezoned to commercial, then the C buffer transitions into an A buffer consistent with the code.
But isn't that buffer have to go in when you apply for your development order? So won't it already be in a place?
Well, it's my understanding, and Beth can speak to this, but it's my understanding that we will put in the buffers pertaining to lots 56 and 57, we'll put in the native open space and the drainage, but we do not have to do the buffering. But again, that's my understanding. If I'm wrong, then Beth can speak to that.
Okay, fine. So you're saying at the time that a DO comes in for those parcels, then that's when the buffer would be installed?
That's my understanding.
Okay, well, we'll have Beth clarify that. Thank you. All right, you can continue.
Then item letter I, that and I and J pertain to commercial buffering. The mixed use overlay standard is 5 feet, 5 trees. So for J, we're doing 5 feet, 5 trees, but with a single hedge, which is above the North Fort Myers standard, and also above the mixed use standard. And then for I, that is just a standard type A commercial buffer. So again, we have a variety of buffers pertaining to the contextual relationship.
All right,
of
so
the
I
site.
just want to clarify that the westernmost lot of what you intend to develop initially is basically going to be open storage. And it will comply with the land development code for screening for open storage, which is opaque fencing and the landscaping associated with that.
That is correct. Lot 56.
On all sides.
No. On the south side,
North and south side.
yes.
Oh, you're asking for a deviation on the
Yes.
south.
We're asking for a deviation for buffering on the, and I'm referring to lot 56. We're asking for buffering deviations for the western edge of lot 56. And again, it's my understanding that we do not have to put a screening fence because of the internal ownership of 56 and 57 to 54 and 55.
Right, but on the roadways, you're going to have to do it.
That's correct. For lots 56.
You'd have to extend it. It's still going to be visible from the street, though.
From Evergreen?
Yeah,
No, I don't think so.
all right.
And finally, if in fact lots 54 and 55 ultimately become part of the business, then yes, that screening fence will be extended, absolutely. And also it would be extended up Brown Street. But if they sell it and if it's not used for open storage, then we don't have to put a continuous 8-foot screening fence.
Okay, so this site plan is showing a green space and which divides two stormwater management areas?
That is correct.
Okay, and that's going to support the impervious area of the easternmost lots
Of the entire site?
of the entire
Of the
site,
entire site.
designed to accommodate the entire site?
Yes, and it's designed on a worst-case scenario.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So that's going in initially, it
Yes.
sounds like? Okay.
Yes. Okay, the deviations, again, there's 6 deviations. Staff has agreed with our findings. D1, that I've already spoke to that. That is, well, actually, I haven't. D1 is the 1352, where you have for vehicular and boat sales, the actual building has to be set back 50 feet because we're using the existing building and restoring it. It's a 28-foot. I would like to add that the origins of 1352, I remember this very well, was relating to, let's say, the Sam Galloway project down in Estera, where you have these massive vehicular display facilities with big buildings. So not only do we have a reasonable nexus between the request and the site conditions, but the application of 50 feet is not pertinent to the request. Deviation 2, that is also 1352. Because we are using the existing single-family home and restoring it, what we wanted to do is have a reduced setback to the north boundary from 40 feet to 10 feet. That would allow us some flexibility to expand that building, and staff has agreed with that. So that is a reduction in the side yard setback. Deviation 3, relates to the south adjoining lot 57 ancillary boat storage barn. The code 1352 requires a 100-foot setback. Because we are using the existing and demolished, it's gone now, but we're using the existing footprint, you know, we can't meet that. We would have to push it up. So we were requesting a deviation to 61.5 feet. Staff has agreed with that. It benefits the project. It still complies with the code in regard to, you know, separation, residential. Deviation 4, that is the internal buffering, let's say between lots 55 and 56, because we, you know, we may own it, well, we do own it and we may be using it. We do not need to buffer that, and staff has agreed with that deviation. We do appreciate that. Deviation 5 gets back to 1352, as I did walk you through it. 25 feet, you know, with the berm, we can't meet that standard, so what we're doing is coming up with a type D right of way and type D buffer, 10 feet, plantings is installed at 36 inches, maintained at 48 inches, that type of thing. And again, it's reasonably related to our intent and purpose to rehabilitate that building, and we can't fit a 25-foot buffer. And then finally, and we have representatives of Catrone and Associates to speak to this if you desire more technical specificity. The existing right-of-way, Judd Road, is 50 feet with an open section, open drainage section. The code is for open drainage, it has to be 60 feet. And so we're requesting a deviation from that. Staff has agreed to it. We've detailed, you know, and basically what you're looking at both in the slide and on the master concept plan itself, you know, are the DO sections that show how this thing will work, the relationship of the open drainage to the side slopes, the drainage swale, the buffering, the setbacks. So so we can do we can do open drainage in a 50-foot right-of-way for Judd only, and still meet all the other code requirements pertaining to slope, swale, sidewalk, setbacks, and the like. So staff has agreed with that, and again, we have representatives with Catrone and Associates to speak to, you know, if you want to get into the
Yeah,
detail.
I'd like an overview anyway of how the stormwater management system is going to work. So maybe as part of that, they can talk about the road.
Okay. Well, then they will be speaking to the disputed item, and that'll be the second to last slide, so then they can segue into the drainage.
Great.
Okay. Development standards, I just want to highlight the heights of 35 feet. Again, a front setback of 28 feet. The Evergreen Road side yard setback at 40 feet minimum. And again, the rest of the setbacks are standard code, and really the standards pertain to the potential western lots 54 and 55, because our setbacks are specifically defined on lots 56 and 57. You know, again, the ancillary service barn at 61.5 feet, the front yard setback for the single-family home at 28 feet, the single-family home 10-foot north boundary side yard setback, that type of thing. Now the open space for mixed-use overlay, 20% of that half's got to be native. So the required, excuse me, the required total open space is 0.91 acres. We are providing 1.55 acres, so we significantly exceed the minimum requirement, not only for the mixed-use overlay standard, but for, you know, normal CPD. So we're above open space on the general open space, and then for the native open space, we're required to have 0.47 acres, and we are providing 0.7 acres. What we did was basically select the area that has the most, the highest concentration of native trees, primarily oaks. And so the concept was, let's get that area. And then also, when we originally started, assuming the 1430 Brown Street was going to be residential, there was an opportunity of using the native open space area to really get a good buffer in depth for the single family, although again it may end up being commercial. So we meet all the code standards and we exceed the general open space standards. In terms of internal traffic circulation, the way this project will work, Madam Hearing Examiner, is as follows. We have two access connections onto Judd Road that meet the separation standard, the code separation standard. The north access is for customers and employees to come into the property. If they're customers, they park into the rear of the building. Employees can park there, and also they can park in the general staging area of the boat service barn, which is immediately to the west of the restored single-family home. The south connection works as follows. The business will be utilizing the US 41 frontage for boat display. Hey, here are our boats, come and get them. The concept then would be for a boat that is sold, it would be moved either by trailer or by forklift across Judd, at the south access point, and then to the probably to the service barn area for outfitting, because typically when you sell a boat, most customers want customization, canvas, electronics, or the like. So the boat movement from east to west, and then and needless to say, when a boat is sold and outfitted on the west side, then the new boats that are being stored on the west side will will slide over to the east side for boat display. When you look at the traffic counts, the graphic on the lower right basically shows, and that's a peak hour graphic. There are no peak hour trips. From our analysis, if they're doing really well, they're selling 2 boats a week. Again, if they're doing really well, selling 2 boats a week is good. Then you have basically, 4+ movements across from Judd. And I point this out because there was some discussion relating to a previous case, the Port Sanibel Marina case, if you worked that or if you didn't work that, where movements of boats that are being stored was a major issue. In this particular case, it's just not germane, it's not applicable. I can walk you through the various reasons why if you care to. But that's how the project works. Basically, the stuff to the east is being displayed, taking advantage of US 41. Once it's sold, moves over to the west side for outfitting. Then a new boat is a transition from the west side to the east side. And we do agree with staff's finding on page 8. We have sufficient access and there are minimal transportation impacts. Now, in terms of the basis of approval, 34-145 D4A1A, and if I can just walk you through this very briefly, it's in intensive development. This property is central to the US 41 Pondella Pine Island Road commercial mixed-use corridor. Has all the appropriate goods and all the appropriate services and utilities, so we're consistent with the overall intent of that. And then again, we are consistent with the mixed-use overlay. We basically are not taking advantage of the buffering. We meet the standards, so we're consistent with those two. Now, in terms of objective 2.1, development location, and policy 2.2.1 that implements that. As I pointed out, we are central to the Pondella Pine Island US 41 corridor. So the property and project is central, it's contiguous, it doesn't create any type of sprawl. So the growth management aspect is complied with. With regard to residential compatibility, I would like to spend a little bit of time with that. That's 515. And again, the property is unique in that half of it, generally speaking, is surrounded by commercial, and the other half is surrounded by residential. So it's compatible in the following ways. First and foremost, we're using an existing single-family home, a low ranch-style building, and we're converting it. We're not building up into a 3-story. We don't have a very large, footprint. So it's small, it's scaled. That unto itself is consistent with the residential context. So we're achieving compatibility. The buffering, as I pointed out, we're doing substantially on the first phase. We're doing 1352 buffering, which is significant. In addition, we're doing the 34005 screening wall, which again helps achieve residential compatibility to the RS1 and AG2 single-family homes on the south side of Evergreen. Again, as I pointed out, for lots 55, instead of doing the mixed-use buffer at 10 feet and 5 trees, we're doing a standard type D, 5 trees per 100 with a double hedge. That helps secure compatibility. Further along Evergreen on the south side, you have the park, which does not present residential compatibility. And again, we're still doing a type D buffer. The RS1 zone 1430 Brown Street, I've already discussed that. We're doing a type C with the wall, but we do want the option of A if it's zone commercial. And finally, the big picture is this for compatibility. The concept of using the single-family home and the boat barn service area to the north achieves clustering. We're moving all of our operations away from Evergreen to the furthest point possible. So by clustering away from Evergreen, that is yet another means to achieve compatibility. So we do agree with staff's finding that we're consistent with 515 and other commercial to residential compatibility policies and standards. Continuing, again, we agree with staff report page 6 of findings relating to 6111 traffic and access impacts. Again, two access connections onto Judd that meet the driveway connection standards, and the traffic is de minimis. Screening and buffering above code standards, that's policy 6113. We agree with staff findings on page 3. 6114, adequacy and availability of services. We have exhibits showing Lee County utilities and Florida governmental utilities with adequate capacity to service that. That's exhibit G. 6115, impact on adjacent land uses and surrounding neighborhoods. I previously addressed that on neighborhood compatibility. Staff report page 6. Proximity to other centers, 6116. Again, staff report page 6. It's proximate to the existing Gasparilla marine sales. And again, I do want to put on the record, this project is critical for the business because they've been so successful. They've clearly outgrown the site. They need this to continue their business. 6117, environmental conditions. 33% general open space. We're preserving 7 out of 11 20-inch plus heritage trees. No wetlands, flowways, no impacts. So we're doing a good job environmentally. I'm very pleased to say that. Compatibility 614, I've already discussed that. Continuing with the North Fort Myers community plan standards, 3315-32, met with them twice. They really liked the project, so positive thumbs up on that. Tree preservation. And I have touched base with that, but if you look at the North Fort Myers community plan, they're very heavy into tree preservation. There are a lot of performance standards, and we meet them. 331582, we're clustering our operational area in flux 110 disturbed area, so that helps preserve trees. 331582, in terms of the actual tree preservation, again, 7 out of 11 heritage trees, 4 additional large oak trees, and we're preserving approximately 45 12-inch and above pine, palm, and oak trees. So we're doing a good job on that. When you look at the standard for healthy sable palms to be relocated, yeah, we'll comply. If we have the opportunity to. We didn't get that specific. Again, they're in the development order phase right now, and Dave Jones and Associates is the landscape architect. I think they're dealing with that aspect of the project. Native trees to be relocated, again, we'll comply where appropriate. And then effort made to preserve heritage trees. Yeah, again, we have made a significant effort, and we've done, I think, a really good job for that. That's one of the reasons why the North Fort Myers Planning Panel said, yeah, we really like this project. Additional standards relating to the North Fort Myers. Again, it's more tree preservations, but we are incorporating technique, specifically if you look at the graphic, how the surface water management area interfaces with the native open space area. We're doing a very large setback consistent with the code, setback from the oak tree drip line, and then we're putting in, a berm. So the techniques are consistent with code requirements to make sure that there are no surface water management basin related impacts to root systems. So we're consistent with that. And again, the surface water management systems overlapping. If you look at the master concept plan, sheet 2 and section BB and the surface water management plan, which is reflected that we do comply with that. Now, again, more tree preservation. We've incorporated native trees pursuant to the North Fort Myers Community Plan. The pedestrian walkway linkage, we are providing code-required setbacks, sidewalks, and it is important to know that the project, and I failed to point this out, it's not in the, oh gosh, I forget the specific nomenclature, but for the North Fort Myers Community Plan, of commercial corridors and commercial nodes, if I'm using the right terminology. We're not subject to any of the very specifically designated North Fort Myers areas for advanced commercial standards and pedestrian linkages. We're outside of that. So in terms of pedestrian linkages, by providing code required sidewalks, we are consistent with the North Fort Myers Section 33 standards. And finally, on sheet 1, the Section AA shows that. The other basis of findings for 34-145, yes, do we meet the code? Yes, we do. Walk you through that. We're consistent across the board. Staff agrees with that, and we agree with staff. Is it compatible? Again, that's 145D4A1C. Yes, it is. I've discussed that in depth. If you look at the development standards comparative assessment, getting back to meeting the code, it shows how we're exceeding open space. It shows how we're exceeding buffering on the north boundary. We're exceeding buffering standards on Brown Road. The actual development intensity, if you're looking at a 40% standard, that equates to over 79,000 square feet, and we're coming in at 35,000 square feet. So, we're well under that 40% standard. So yes, we meet and or exceed the code standards. Other HEX findings, provide sufficient access. Yes, we agree with staff. Staff report page 8 got into how the project works in terms of access and turning movements. Transportation facility impacts, again, we agree with staff report page 8. Adverse environmentally critical or sensitive areas, the subject property more or less is either disturbed or high and dry. There are no wetlands. We did a protected species survey. There's no occupied habitat, so we're consistent with that, and we're also more or less out of the 100-year floodplain. Will be served by urban services. Yes, I've discussed that. And then the deviations, I've walked you through that. Staff report does a more thorough job than my presentation, but we do meet the standards in terms of how they benefit the project and how they are consistent with the general intent of the code. So the disputed item, I would like to give a broad brush on this. The staff report is saying, hey, we're requesting 131,400 square feet, and we're not referred to the exhibits that I handed, which also shows the actual application for public hearing. It's my understanding that, it's my interpretation that staff has misinterpreted our methodology for traffic impacts. What we did was this, Madam Hearing Examiner, because boat sales is kind of unique. We ended up hiring a company and did site-specific traffic counts for the eastern 1.2 acre site. Because again, if you're looking at the IT manual, it really doesn't do that. And again, we have the experts from Catrona and Associates to speak at length, but what then they did was basically did a proportional analysis. Well, if 1.2 acres generates X amount of peak hour trips, then the west site that consists of, for the first phase, 2.5 acres, a proportional expansion, then that would generate Y amount of trips. And again, I hold the opinion that I believe staff just misinterpreted, because we ended up coming up with 131,000 square feet, which was used for the comparative analysis for the peak hour estimates, but in no way, shape, or form have we ever requested that. It's solely 35,000 square feet. And again, I would like staff to more or less speak to that, because I am not an expert in traffic impacts. I just wanted to give you the broad brush.
Good morning, Al Quattrone with Quattrone and Associates. So I think Greg was touching on it pretty good. As he mentioned, they had the traffic counts for the property to the east, much smaller site. We just took that square footage of their property, related it to the square footage of our property that's set aside for the boat sales, and that's where the 131,000 square feet came out. So that's a area of property total, not buildings, but overall property. The open storage, there it includes the buildings, and that was solely used for a traffic analysis by working with Lee County staff. That's how they determined they wanted us to do the analysis. And again, as Greg mentioned, that somehow ended up working its way into the staff report as our request. But the original request filed by Greg did ask for only 35,000 square feet of building. So our 48-hour letter is more of a clarification, explain how that confusion may have come across.
And my understanding is you did basically an independent calculation of the trips generated by surveying similar businesses?
Yes.
And the trips generated by them relative to their land area devoted to the business?
Yes, essentially. So simple math, if they're an acre and a half and they had 10 trips, we had 3 acres, we just assumed that was 20 trips, twice as much, but obviously the number's a little more involved in that. And then I think staff then asked us to go also add a 50% safety factor to that to, encompass maybe this would have a little bit more proportionally traffic. But essentially it was an acreage comparison to come up with peak trips, and then adding a factor of safety to that.
And at any rate, impact fees will address any impacts to the county road network?
Yes, because I think there was also a condition in the staff report that we had to get an updated water availability letter, because our availability letter was based on 35,000 square feet of building area. Water demand is still based on the square footage of the building and the people in those buildings, so our availability letter wouldn't be changing.
I'd like you to walk through the site plan with me.
Sure.
In terms of how the stormwater management system is going to work. And this system is going to be independent of the triangular piece that fronts on 41?
Yes. So the risk of turning...
So gray shaded areas are impervious, correct?
These are impervious pavement. These other areas would be also considered impervious, but could be more of a crushed stone type material. Okay. So essentially that's all still impervious. We don't have the drainage plan here, but what they're looking to do, we'll be doing is this area along here, and then along the south, as well as this area and the indigenous preserve, and then another area to the north of it. That's all part of the master drainage system. So a series of pipes will take the runoff from the impervious into the linear detention area, and then also some of it will go into this northern detention area and the southern detention area. So basically 3 points where water will sheet flow or point sheet flow into the detention areas. Then it'll overflow into the indigenous area for additional water storage. So what they're doing is they're not directly discharging into indigenous area. This is more of an overflow for additional water quantity storage.
And where's the outfall?
The outfall would be coming out of this detention area and going into the evergreen roadside swale on the north side.
And that what proceeds to the west?
And then that proceeds to west, yes.
And this design will accommodate impervious anticipated on the
Future.
Brown Road parcel.
Yes, and this was a project that required to go to South Florida Water Management District, and we do already have our water management permit in hand. And we've submitted for a development order. The bulk of the comments through the development order have been addressed. The zoning is obviously an outstanding item, so anything that comes out of that, with I think a little bit of tweaks in the design. I don't know if you had questions regarding the swale on Judd Road, but I think Greg did point on that too.
So the alternative is, if you wanted to comply with the code and keep the 50-foot right away, you would have to pipe.
Essentially, that's the thought, is that when constructing new roadways, the 60-foot would accommodate roadside swells. You go through a little narrow if you're going to pipe it. In this situation, because we're actually putting a portion of our sidewalk outside the right-of-way onto the property into what'll eventually be a sidewalk easement, that gives us a little bit more room to work with to go ahead and put the swale, or keep a swale in Judd Road right away.
And that's what the deviation's for.
Yes. And that's been reviewed through staff also as part of the development order.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? No,
Not from you.
not for me? Okay.
Greg, I have some questions if he's going to finish his presentation, and then I'll have questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Hearing Examiner, just to close, on the last slide, slide 23, we meet the 9 specified criteria for demonstrating entitlement to the CPD, and we respectfully request that you approve the the project. Thank you.
Okay, I do have a number of questions. First, I want to say with regard to Joshua, have you testified in this forum before? No, okay, and you didn't testify today, so I just want to make sure that you understand that in the future, when you testify here, you need to be qualified as an expert if you're going to speak to engineering or, water management or anything. I'm accepting this as an exhibit, but since you didn't participate, I'm not able to qualify you as an expert in this hearing. It's no offense, I'm just saying that's, at the next hearing, when you do testify, please make sure that you ask the hearing examiner to take 5 minutes so that you can go over your educational and work background and demonstrate proficiency in civil engineering and the land development regulations. Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to get his feet wet today, watching the hearing.
And it's good to observe first before you're thrown into the
Then
action.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I would suggest after his observation, you probably just want to leave.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of questions.
Yes.
My reading of the Land Development Code, I work frequently with cases in North Fort Myers, so I'm very familiar with the North Fort Myers Community Plan, Land Development Code, and the LEAP Plan. And my reading of the regulations is that an interconnection is required between this CPD and the commercial property to the north. That's pursuant to 33-1548. Requires interconnections and shared access for new development when it is adjacent to another commercial use. Okay, the master concept plan that I reviewed does not show an interconnection. If you have reasons not to want one, you need to request a deviation. That's all I'm saying. Either you need to show it or you request a deviation.
I'll write that down.
Oh, wait, there's more, so let me go over. Okay.
You need a pen?
No,
I got
right
it.
here. Madam Hearing Examiner, what section of Division 33?
That's 33-1548.
15,
48.
yes?
Okay. The second thing is there's 2 sections of the North Fort Myers Community Planning Regulations that states that the commercial corridor land development provisions apply to property that are contiguous to and developed in conjunction with properties with frontage on US 41. And this project, by its name and its master concept plan and your testimony, is definitely being developed in conjunction with the property on the commercial corridor. So those regulations would apply. That's also repeated it's repeated in two sections, 33, 15, 37.
15,
37, and also 33, 15, 66.
and Madam Healy, what was the first one before you said 1537?
That's the two.
Okay, just two then. Can I interrupt?
so-
Madam Healy?
Just,
Okay, I'm
let me finish. So the master concept plan, that says the master concept plan has to include publicly accessible open space. And that has to be 10% of the land area of the development with 40,000 square feet or more. You're doing less than 40,000 square feet. So that's not going to come into play if if you've corrected the request to be 35. But it comes into play when we talk about uses that are permitted on the site. And I identified a few uses that are not permitted in the commercial corridor. That would be computer and data processing services, gasoline dispensing systems, special. Home occupation's not obviously appropriate, it's a commercial property. Parcel and delivery services. So I'm going to suggest that that should be removed from the list of permitted uses. I'm going to give you time to go back and review this. We can take a break. I want to confirm that you've established the height will be maxed out at 35 feet.
correct on the
Okay.
record now or in the written resubmittal?
No, you just said it during
Yes,
your testimony.
35 feet, that's
Right.
correct, Madam Mayor.
Also, I believe because of my interpretation of the Land Development Code, you would be subject to commercial architectural standards, which has to do with the exterior style of the buildings on the property. So that's something that's going to come into play more during the development order stage, but I want to alert you to that. And like I say, if you're not going to provide the interconnection, you need to request a deviation. I can think of several reasons why it might be appropriate, but it still needs to be requested in my interpretation of the Land Development Code. The uses that I've identified, perhaps they're not even interested in pursuing those uses, so it's not going to be a big deal to take them off. And that was it.
For clarification, for the interconnection 1548, the concern is with the existing Northern Tool and Equipment interconnection?
Right.
Okay.
Right, and I don't know if that brings into play any other sidewalk issues or anything. I didn't look that much deeper, but, I mean, my interpretation of the code, you've got basically the substandard street separating the two. There's definitely going to be an interface, and I believe it's appropriate to apply that. I want to commend the site plan design in being sensitive to the residential uses nearby and the significant step down in land use category across Brown Road. I think there was a lot of sensitivity in the design, recognizing that, and what we believe to be a single-family home on that notched-out parcel, and we'll see what happens in the future. But I appreciate that, and I will share that these are not impediments to approval of the request, but I feel as though these items need to be addressed. The LEED plan, as it's recently been amended, encourages the county supporting expansion of existing businesses, so that's definitely consistent with the economic development element of the plan. I just want to make sure that these other things are addressed.
Okay, and just for clarification on the commercial corridor 1537 and 1566, how do I say this? That really relates to standards and not a formal deviation request?
No, I think you would need a deviation if you weren't going to comply.
Okay, thank you. And then,
And that would apply, from what I can see, is the interconnection. I see the architectural stuff as something that's really a DO stage thing that you can address then. And sidewalks could be addressed now, but that's also something that could probably be pushed off to the development order stage and possibly get an administrative amendment Just, I want to alert you to that. So that's really the interconnection is the thing that you need to consider whether you want to request a deviation.
Yes, and that's 1548 then.
That's 1548.
And then, Madam here, from a procedural perspective, shall we request to keep the record open for resubmittal?
No, I think you could just say, we're going to request a deviation from this section, here's the reason, site security, whatever your reason is for why you feel as though an interconnection isn't appropriate, or if you're going to provide the interconnection, then, or stub out or whatever, you can just, I'll leave the record open for a few days so you could submit a revised site plan.
Okay, so then, again, it'll be,
We'd like to-
yeah, it'll be,
Obviously, if we could ask for the deviation right now, not.
Yes.
Exactly, that's
Yes.
my point.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm just trying to thread the needle here.
yes.
Right.
No.
and I'm thinking with what's going on with me.
No, so I think,
I-
like I said, I could come up and address some of the,
But I was.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about, I mean, like I say, I feel as though you can make an argument for not doing the interconnection, supporting the deviation right here on your feet. You're all pretty experienced, and then I'll just make sure I include that in my recommendation. And then it won't be necessary to leave the record open for any reason.
Well,
And I just want to give you,
take the lead and.
you want to take that?
Yeah, for the interconnection, North Fort Myers Plan, Community Plan 33-1548, the interconnection standard to the north adjoining Northern Tool and Equipment. We are requesting deviation from that for the following reasons. And first and foremost, Northern Tool and Equipment is an existing developed site. Their parking lot is separated by what appears to be from, and again, I'm guesstimating, but I've been on that property looking. It's well above a 5-foot standard type A buffer. It is significantly separated by vegetation. So from a functional perspective, to have a stub out to an open space buffer area to a Northern Tool and Equipment parking lot is not viable. The benefit for the subject applicant would be, and I would envision that any potential stub out would be through a parking lot, our parking lot, excuse me, by opening up the property to through traffic. You're really diminishing site security, and site security for boat sales is very important. My client has experienced in the past a number of thefts of motors, of boat engines, and related boat parts that are valued in, the tens and tens of thousands of dollars. So from the applicant's goals and objective of having a secure site to minimize theft, it's very important to not have an interconnect. What we want to do is have a secured site, and that would benefit the property. And then finally, and Al, you could add to this if I'm missing anything, the intent of the code is to minimize traffic impacts along major roads. And in this particular case, Northern Tool and Equipment has direct access, I think it's full median actually, onto US 41. We have direct access to a local street, so there is really no need to have additional through traffic from a arterial to a local street. In fact, I believe the code kind of discourages that, because what the code really envisions is local street to major to minor collector to major collector to arterial. So having a direct interconnect to Northern Tool would be in contrary to the overarching policy of how access management works in Lee County.
okay, thank you very much.
Al, do you have anything?
Nope, you hit on everything, I think.
All right, well, then if you don't have anything further, we'll shift over to staff's presentation, and we'll conclude the record. Thank you.
I was just about to say. Wearing off.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Beth Workman. I'm a principal planner in the zoning section. I have been accepted as an expert in land development code and the LEAD plan, and I wish to be accepted as well today.
Yes, please proceed.
The first thing I'm going to do is do a little bit of housekeeping. I have the PowerPoint, and I also have a new zoning map that addresses the northwest property that was recently rezoned. So it changes it to a C1 zoning district, and also a mixed-use overlay map that was not part of the staff report. So I have those two maps. Give one to the applicant, and then I also have my PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, PowerPoint will be staff exhibit 2. Your staff report is exhibit 1. Exhibit 3 will be the zoning map, and exhibit 4 will be the mixed-use overlay map.
Choked up. Okay.
So this exhibit 3, the zoning map, is supposed to represent that this notched out parcel here is now C1?
Correct.
There's no marking, that's why I'm asking.
The way the maps are
shading.
created is the shade, and the shade is the C1. And I have the REZ case represented in this PowerPoint, and I believe my staff report did mention it, but at the time it was in, and it hadn't
Review.
been approved, yeah. Okay, so the case before you today is DCI 2023-00032. It's the Gasparilla Marine Sales Expansion Commercial Plan Development. So as Mr. Stewart went over, the site is located in North Fort Myers. It is approximately 4.56 acres. It's currently zoned residential, RS1, and the request is to go to the commercial plan development. That is incorrect on that right there. It should be CPD. To permit 131,400 square feet of commercial development. I'm going to touch on this number right now. So in the TIS, there was 2 different square feet, one for the back 2 parcels and one for the front 2 parcels. And when our Department of Transportation was writing their memo, and you'll see it in their memo, they combined those 2 numbers to get 131,400 square feet total, worst case scenario, to look at the traffic. So they came and spoke to me when I was writing my staff report. They're like, how are you going to handle the square feet? Because the request on the record is 35,000, but yet our TIS is saying something different. It was not conveyed that this is a worst case scenario, that it is 35,000, but they wanted to see, the breakdown. So we changed it to 131,400 because of the way the TIS was written, and because of the way the traffic, the Lee County Department of Transportation memo was written. It was based on the 131,400. So we went ahead and changed the request at that point. So if the applicant is in dispute of that to go to 35,000, staff understands what happened in the dialogue that zoning was not involved with how to address the TIS. And so 35,000 is understood as the total square feet of the development as a whole, all 4 parcels. We got that. So the use request is for boat sales and service and storage on 2.58 acres, which is lots 56 and 57. And the remainder of the lots tap into the schedule of uses that are being requested, that now with which you've added for the commercial corridor may need to be revised. And I'll touch on that code a little bit later towards the end. So property history, I want to go over this just a little bit. Like Mr. Stewart said, there's existing structures on this site. This is an old aerial from the before Gasparilla Marine went in here. So it was an old gas station here, and then there's the residential buildings on these parcels. Then around, I believe it was 2005, there was a rezone that happened for the CPD in here for the boat sales and display, and it went in right here. And this, you can see, remains the single family. The property is located in the mixed use overlay as well as in the intensive development future land use category. So this was a recent thing since the CPD went in. So this whole area, along with, and I'll bring up a bigger map, shows the whole corridor of mixed use overlay that basically hugs US 41 North Tamiami. And the reason for that is the mixed use overlay allows for a more intense development, a mix of uses for interconnectivity so that you don't have to always use US 41 to get around. So the interconnections are important in that respect. So this is the master concept plan for the development. I want to point out that on one of Mr. Stewart's slides, he showed an interconnect between these two parcels to the remaining back two parcels. I would suggest that this master concept plan be revised to show that interconnection, because this was one of the things that was discussed during the review, was how the two parcels up front along Evergreen and Judge were going to interplay with the two back parcels. And through that review, wasn't really understood, like, are they going to be connected or not? So in that one slide, there was an interconnection, because if this doesn't get sold off and Gasparilla Marine is doing so well that they need some extra storage for the private storage, that might be developed as part of the whole. So the interconnection would need to be shown in there as well. So with this master concept plan, it shows the deviations, it shows the storage of water for the surface water management, the indigenous area, and then the lay of the land for the two parcels up front, lot 57, lot 56, and then this is a future development footprint. This is the zoning criteria that the hearing examiner as well as staff needs to make findings to, and in the staff report I touched on each one of these findings to give examples as to how the proposal is meeting the various criteria. And as I go through my presentation, it'll be tied to each one of these. So the lead plan analysis, the future land use category is intensive development, as Mr. Stewart mentioned. He went into this in depth. Lead plan policy 1.1.2. It has access to major arterial roads. It has the public services available, and the public service letter, which was an outstanding issue in the staff report, had to do with that 131,000, which is a moot point now that we're going to 35. So just want to put that on the record as well. So the public services are available for sewer and water, as well as bus stops and the access to the arterial roads. It is in the mixed use overlay according to Lead Plan Map 1C. The community planning area is the North Fort Myers community planning area. There was a public information meeting held on July 6th. Mr. Stewart mentioned there were 2 public hearing meetings. The one in the record in the file was to the July 6th, 2023, which meets the Lead Plan Policy 17.3.5. I'm not going to belabor these topics, but I do want to talk about compatibility because of where this is located. It's an intensive development, but it also abuts to the west sub-outlying suburban, which has residents in lower end, low residential, not a lot of commercial. So we want to talk a little bit about compatibility, which Mr. Stewart did a really good job going through. So Lead Plan Policy 6.1.1, that has to do with the screening and buffering, as well as 6.1.3 to provide the visual harmony and screening. The design of the site is to have the more intense development, the working end of the boat sales, towards the arterial, towards Judd. And then transition it as you work west to the private warehouse, if that's what's going to go on, or any of the other uses listed. The buffering associated with this project gets a little difficult because you are in the mixed use overlay, but you have a use that triggers a more intense buffer. The applicant is meeting the intensity of the buffers. They're meeting over, above and beyond the mixed use overlay on the western two parcels that are not in display sale. So they're providing above and beyond, and I'm going to go over that in depth, but it's important because that is what complies with the Lee Plan policy, because of the enhanced screening and buffering and the conditions of this DCI that were recommended by staff state that as well, to memorialize that. The open space is above and beyond, as Mr. Stewart said, the regular commercial buffering. So in a mixed use overlay large development, it's 20% open space. The applicant is providing 33%, which is a large development, 10415, outside of the mixed use overlay open space. That's an enhancement to then further meet these Lee Plan policies to soften the use as you work west with the preserve and with the increased buffering. Lee Plan policy 6.1.5 is talking about traffic carrying capacity by clustering activities. Mr. Stewart went through that. The existing buildings on the site are being utilized to support the boat sales, storage, and display business. There are some enhancements to those buildings and additions to, but it's all happening on the easternmost side of this development, and the clustering of that activity that happens. And Mr. Stewart went over how the triangular piece that's off-site, abutting US 41, is playing with this application, with the boat sales and the replenishment of stock on that, and the way the boats will be moved across Judd Road to show the usage of the right-of-way that is a local road. Lee Plan policy 6.1.6 is maintaining land development regulations, again, for landscaping, open space, and buffering. And I mentioned that previously, how everything is being enhanced. Again, this is the master concept plan, talking about the different buffering impacts with the mixed use overlay. 11.1.1 talks about the connectivity to adjacent neighborhoods. They are providing a sidewalk. The sidewalk on Judd will interconnect to Evergreen, and there is a public park that's located to the southwest, and that all gets interconnected through this development adjacent to their site. One of the deviations that's being requested from the stormwater, the width of the road with the open stormwater swale, the sidewalk, and the buffering, all has to do with all those components coming together in that one area. And I'm going to show a cross section that shows why the deviation from the buffer, why the deviation from the storage, and then how that sidewalk plays in there, and what the end result will be in that area for compatibility. 11.2.5 talks about the regulations in mixed use to allow a variety of uses. So looking at the development patterns along the west side of US 41, you see that basically the commercial uses are lining US 41, and as you work to the west, it becomes less intense. So you have AG2 properties that are vacant or developed down to the south, and then you have the residential components that are about a half acre, some of them are a full acre, and then to the southwest you do have the park that has a dog park and tennis courts that are supporting Lee County, and then you have these large and small acre residential lots as you work from this property. This property right here was recently rezoned. It has a single family structure on it, and it was rezoned to C1. The parcel to the south has a vet clinic right here that was approved with a CPD, and then it also has a vacant CPD that was approved for a shopping center, and it has a master concept plan that has the typical shopping center pattern with a big open parking lot and such that are adjacent to these single-family uses. So you can see how the intensity rolls. And so the development and the design of this site has the higher intensity, and as you work back, the private warehouse will go in, or the open storage with the enhanced buffering. Mentioning the Caliber collision, which Mr. Stewart talked about, this is Caliber collision. It also has Northern Tool. These share an access point. So when we talk about that additional deviation being requested, if there was a stub out here, the stub out would lead to an existing cross access that they have between these two parcels that share this opening right here onto US 41. So I understand that it opens up a situation where the deviation is necessary because of the existing footprint of this building here. And then this is a restaurant, does not have a drive-through, that has access here. And I kind of ran through the animal clinic to the south was rezoned in 2003. The 1985, this was for a home center is what they called it in 85, with lumber sales. So it had like a commercial component with open storage and lumber sales.
That was from 1985?
Yes, ZAB 85-196. And there's a master concept plan that kind of is a bubble plan that just shows almost like a strip center going in here, but the use approved was a home center. So like almost like a Lowe's, a Home Depot type of thing with the open storage. So you can see intensity here kind of matches the intensity with what the applicant is proposing.
And that's never been developed?
It's vacant, never been developed. I kind of went over to the east, going along US 41, and as you work to the opposite side of US 41, the mixed use overlay runs up and down this side as well. And you have this mix of commercial, conventional uses. There are really no commercial plan developments along here. They're all conventional. Most of them are not developed. The ones that are been there for years in the C1 zoning district along here. The west I kind of talked about, Brown Road, and then this AG piece is vacant, and then you have the single family up here. Talking about that conventional RS1 rezone, that was rezoned. The case number was REZ 2023-00036, and it was approved. So the applicant has asked for a reduction in a buffer on the master concept plan because right now they're providing a residential buffer, commercial to residential, a type C with a wall. They could come in and reduce that and then provide the type A.
So they want that acknowledged in a condition? Or, I mean, what am I supposed to do with this?
Revise the MCP to change the zoning classification on the adjacent.
All right, and they need to revise the master concept plan to show a deviation mark at the internal interconnection anyhow, and to show, well, two things. One, to show the deviation to the north connection, and also to show the arrow within the project that you requested.
Yes.
And at that time, they can adjust the buffer around that parcel that has since been zoned to C1.
Correct. And that would be the only thing that I would ask, and is that type, if they're going to go to type A buffer, that it's going to be an enhanced type A buffer to match what staff has conditioned on the remainder type A's, to have an additional hedge row for blocking view in here. If this,
So it's going to match the
this up here.
yeah.
There's a condition about that in the zoning
Right,
right
I
now.
remember. Okay.
And so and
So Al, the revised master concept plan is going to show a deviation mark along the north boundary. It's going to show an arrow interconnecting internal, and it's going to modify the buffer around that notch out there.
And I think that the type A is an enhanced type A, and the condition has additional shrubs, like a single hedge. And it was for view in here because of the open storage.
Right, I understand.
That's the surrounding uses. This slide just shows the intensive development boundary versus the sub-outlying, which Mr. Stewart showed as well. And then this is the mixed-use overlay. So you can see how the mixed-use overlay is on both sides of 41 and kind of cuts off at Brown, which was the map that I submitted into the record. Sufficient access, I'm not going to belabor this topic because we kind of went over, Mr. Stewart went over that for the access and how this works with the off-site piece that the applicant owns. This just kind of shows Judd Road, north is to the right. So I kind of took the master concept plan and showed a blow up of how this is, what this is looking like for that deviation here, the deviation for the setback and the side setback. And then number 5 has to do with the buffering, and we'll get into that a little bit about how that looks, because there's a cross section. Because the buffer against here becomes a 10-foot buffer with an easement, so it becomes a 5-foot plantable space. Just in that region, because of the existing structure. So the setback is affected, the buffer is affected, and then the piping that's not being provided, and it's going to be an open swale system, has a deviation as well. So this is a tight little corner right here, having to do with this structure.
And they're repurposing that home to serve for part sales, et cetera.
Yes, yes. And then the piece to the south, which will be added on. So sufficient access, I put this all in here because I was being sensitive to the boat crossing, and this is a local road. So with this kind of lines up with the existing driveway that's on the triangular piece, and then where they're going to be entering on the CPD request. So it kind of shows where this is going and what the details of that is for that sufficient access. Again, it shows the lot 54 and 55 for Evergreen along here. And then the compatibility with the access and traffic. So we really paid attention to this during the review because of the use and because of the property being surrounded by local roads. And the applicant did a really good job to provide information as to how this use was going to work, especially since there's a county park to the southwest. So we wanted to make sure that safety was the number one issue. And the drainage improvements is in condition 8 for the drainage request that supports the deviation. So environmental, the applicant is providing a 0.47 acre live oak hammock preserve in here. 10-415B is the open space section in the land development code. And it states that if you don't have indigenous communities, that you can save individual trees to make up a preserve. And that's kind of what the applicant's doing, because there's really no understory in here. It's basically just oak hammock. And it supports the North Fort Myers vision of preserving existing trees. So they did a really good job to work the stormwater around here. It's nice that there's a development order in, so you can kind of see how they are providing cross sections to preserve the drip line and the root systems of the existing trees that are on the cusp of that area that's being dug out to support the stormwater management. It is meeting the requirement for the indigenous preserve per 10-425 of the mixed use overlay, which is this slide here. It talks about what is required for the mixed use overlay for open space and what the applicant is actually providing. And I kind of talked about that. It's 10% is the indigenous open space. Environmental land and the landscaping. So this kind of goes over the buffering system. So this project is in the mixed use overlay. The mixed use overlay affords right-of-way buffers at 5 feet wide. However, when you're a certain uses in 10-424, it trips those requirements for buffering. This application does just that. So display sale requires a 25-foot right-of-way buffer on Judd and Evergreen. The applicant is providing the 25-foot on Judd. However, due to the existing building here, there needs to be a deviation to allow for a 10-foot wide buffer. The 10-foot wide buffer is encumbered by an easement, a 5-foot wide easement. So there'll be a 5-foot area of plantable space for trees and shrubs. And then as it works down to the south, away from where the building isn't squeezing the buffer, it becomes 25. So it's just in this area right up here that you have that deviation 5 for that 10-foot wide buffer. And then there's also a setback relief from 34-1352. There's an increased setback, and the applicant has requested a deviation. So deviation 5 is the 10-foot wide buffer from the existing structure, and deviation 4 is to allow no buffer between lots 56 and 54. So that is between the open storage section here and then the other area that's the stormwater and indigenous area. So no buffer between those two. Moving further into the site, because we don't have uses, a solid use on here, we fall back on to the mixed use overlay. However, the applicant is providing enhanced buffers to 10-416. So the applicant, instead of a 5-foot buffer, is providing a 15-foot type D buffer, which is an enhancement. It is conditioned along Evergreen and Brown, and then an enhanced buffer along this area to provide the type C buffer, which now will become an A buffer with a single hedgerow, which is an enhancement because of the sub-outlying suburban, because of the residents to the west. So that this will change right here to match condition. It would be the condition 7A. And then in here, we have a 30-foot type F buffer, which is basically met by the indigenous area in here with existing trees. And you can see the stormwater is being dug out around this area, and this remains natural in here at natural grade. And Mr. Catrone went through the stormwater routing. I'm not gonna go over this. This is straight from the staff report and straight from their stormwater management plan of where the outfall goes into Yellow Fever Creek. That's the ultimate outfall. And there'll be pre-treatment on the site as he went over. Urban services, we did receive a revised letter. We needed a revised letter, which I have stated in the record that we do not need now because of the 35,000 square feet being requested, which the TIS was recognized at 131,400. There is adequate roadway infrastructure. There is the fire station, which is in less than a mile. EMS, Medic 7 is less than 2 miles. And then the sheriff's office is less than 2 miles. Bike and pedestrian facilities are available. Lee Plan Map 3D shows the bicycle and pedestrian along US 41. And then the shared use path is there as well. The applicant is providing the sidewalk along Judd, which then has an interconnection with Evergreen that then provides access to the public park. And then Lee Tran Route 140-595. They service North Cleveland Avenue and Pine Island Road. There's a bus stop that's located to the northeast of the subject property, just on where Judd meets 41. So there's a bus stop right there. Schedule of uses, I understand, may need to change because of the hearing examiner looking at this as being in the corridor. I do want to talk a little bit about that. The way that staff reviewed this, and I want to go to an aerial here, bear with me. We can use this one. So Chapter 33, 1566, and this is straight from that section of code, and then you mentioned the definitions in that section, which just reiterates what's in 1566. It states that this section applies to all commercially zoned properties with frontage on or contiguous to and developed with properties with frontage on the following roadways, which it lists US 41. So if we take that and we look at this development, it's fronting on Judd, okay? So this is a commercially zoned property, if it gets approved, commercially zoned property, fronting Judd, which it doesn't front US 41, or contiguous, which contiguous is touching, which this is not touching, to, and developed with. So it's or contiguous to and developed with. So this is not contiguous. It is being developed with, but there's no or in there. So I understand where Madam Hearing Examiner is coming from, but if the code said commercially zoned properties with frontage on or contiguous to or developed with, then staff would be in agreement with the way we're looking at this. But because there's contiguous to and developed with properties with frontage on, that part doesn't comply with the commercial corridor because it has Judd Road between the two. I understand that they have a relationship, how Mr. Stewart defined the traffic and how this is like basically backstock for this piece. I get it. But the way that this is, there's not an or separating that. But if Madam Hearing Examiner wants to make the recommendation to pursue in commercial corridor, then the publicly accessible open space would need to be defined on the master concept plan so that during time of DO, that area can be called out.
Well, it only applies to development with 40,000 square feet or more of non-residential floor area.
Okay, so that wouldn't because
It
we're not
would
in the
apply,
131.
right.
So then we fall under the interconnections I agree with because that's outside of the purview of being in the commercial
All right,
corridor.
so then is it your position that a gasoline dispensing system special is appropriate on this project across from residential and a park?
No, that should, the schedule of uses should be, and here's the thing. Mr. Stewart testified that open storage could go in there, or like a private warehouse. During the review of this, staff was reviewing this with not open storage in mind. We were reviewing it as a commercial use. We weren't reviewing it as it was going to be part of Gasparilla Marine. Even with the client was going to sell that off. So we were looking at it as a separate commercial use. But I agree with you on that use needs to be struck because it's not appropriate next to sub-outlying suburban.
Would you agree home occupation is inapplicable to commercial property?
No, I agree. That should be struck too. So I think that the schedule of uses need to be looked at as a whole, but complying with the commercial corridor, I'm not in agreement with the way that is. If there was an or, the wording was changed in that, I would be fully on board. And, because contiguous is touching. This subject parcel is not touching the triangular piece. It has Judd in between it. And developed with properties with frontage on. So it's not part of that, even though the use will be part of that. But I understand where you're coming from.
It's not really a freestanding use. It's completely dependent on the adjacent property.
Staff treated it like it was display sale. As a matter of fact, and I think unless we have open with boat display area here, we treat it as freestanding on the master concept
Okay,
plan.
well, if you agree that gasoline dispensing system special is not appropriate on the site, I probably don't have any objection to computer and data processing services or parcel delivery services. Although I do have some slight concern about traffic that might be generated from that.
I mean, as a suggestion, we can take a look at the schedule of uses, because now I understand from Mr. Stewart's presentation, the game plan. It sounds like,
Well, we know what's gonna go on the eastern half of the property, so then now we're focusing on what could potentially go on the western portion of the property. And you would think you'd want the least intense uses there as you're touching basically sub-outlying suburban, a county park or neighborhood park, whatever that is there. And any of the more intense uses on that list of requested uses, probably not appropriate there.
yes, and it would fit into the testimony provided about the less intense as you work towards sub-outlying suburban, so that would fit that. So staff and applicant can take a look at that and provide a clean schedule of uses.
All right.
And I think I can wrap it up. I think I have a deviation. The deviations, just real quick, I just listed them in my PowerPoint presentation. I go into detail in them in the staff report. Deviation 1 with the 50-foot setback for buildings to allow 28-foot. That is that existing building setback. That's 1. Deviation 2 is the 40-foot side yard setback for display sale. That is in this region right here, because display sale is happening all throughout in here. And then, the 100-foot setback between the buildings and items covered for 34-1352 to allow 61.5-foot setback between existing building and residentially zoned property. So that is along the south piece, because there's residents down here, and this road, it's a 100-foot setback. So they're asking for 61.5 in here. And then that takes us to 4, which is the rear property setback for boat sales and display to be buffered by a single hedgerow to allow no buffer. That's between the property lines, because their display sale is right here. There's the line of it. And so they don't want to have a buffer in here between the uses for this property line here.
Because that area is going to be open storage.
This is like their backstock open storage area, and then this is the display sale, and this is the inner workings for customers. And then number 5, the 2-foot high, this is the buffer requirement along Judd. So 34-1352 not only requires a 25-foot buffer, it requires the 2-foot undulating berm. It requires the double hedge. They want no undulating berm, a 10-foot wide buffer with 5 trees every 100 and a single hedgerow, only where the existing building
Right, and
is along this
plantings
region.
will be confined to a 5-foot area there.
Plantings are confined to a 5-foot area, and I have this slide here that goes over the drainage, but it also shows you there's a 5-foot public utility easement, and there's the 10-foot buffer. So the 5-foot buffer is in this region right here, but they're providing a 10-foot overall buffer.
Right. Is there a pending development order on this?
Yes. And so this slide also shows you the detail for deviation 6, which goes into that 60-foot right-of-way for open drainage to allow the 50-foot with the open swale. And this is why these deviations kind of play off each other. So you've got the buffer deviation, you've got the drainage. So there's kind of a squeeze happening in here. And then you have the sidewalk, which is shown on here too. And we worked with Josh on this because he was working on the development order. So deviation location. And so the findings and conclusions, staff believes that the applicant is complying with the criteria, and staff recommends approval as conditioned.
All right, thank you very much. Pardon me?
May I
Yes.
speak to clarify?
Yes.
Do you want your presentation up?
Oh,
Okay.
this is really just to clarify. Greg Stewart for the record, Madam Hearing Examiner. First, I think we can, given various lifestyle issues, I'm thinking if we could leave the record open till November 8th for the master concept plan resubmittal, along with a revised deviation schedule and a use schedule. That would be, I'm pretty comfortable in saying we could get all that stuff in, and that'll allow for adequate time to consult with Beth, and getting the uses. With regard to your use comments, yes, gasoline dispense, the uses that you outlined, sure, absolutely. We can
so
refine.
just, that would be the revised master concept plan. It's going to show a deviation for the interconnection to the north. It's going to show an internal interconnection. It's going to revise the buffer around the recently rezoned parcel to C1. There's going to be a revised, then separate from the master concept plan, there's going to be a revised list of permitted uses. And then let's say, please submit that to us by end of business, November 8th.
Yes.
Of course, you're welcome to do so sooner, but you have until the 8th.
Yes. Okay, and then my second comment, and I mentioned this in the presentation, but you disagree with me about the commercial corridor. I couldn't recall the proper nomenclature, but my interpretation is consistent with Ms. Workman's. I agree with Ms. Workman's interpretation. We're not in the commercial corridor for the reasons that she stated. And one thing that I need to point out, that if you look at the DCI 2016-00014, we had the opportunity with this application to come in and formally amend that to expand. Rather, we treated this based upon our understanding and consultations that, coming in separately, this is an independent CPD. Yes, the uses are reasonably related and it's owned by the same business and there's an absolute nexus, but from a LDC perspective, we agree with staff. We do not believe this is a commercial corridor. And the reason why this is important, Madam Hearing Examiner, and this is my question, when you look at the commercial corridor and the standards 33-1572, the public access to open space, our open space is that the native open space, the 0.47, it's surrounded to the north by and to the south by drainage. There's no public access.
That would make it appropriate for a deviation.
But that's my question. Shall we request a deviation for that too? Or shall, again, I believe that it's not applicable because we're not in the commercial corridor, so I'm not sure whether we should request a formal deviation on that.
Does 34.2 define contiguous?
34.2 does not. I went to Merriam-Webster for contiguous because I went into the definitions. It didn't have it. It has a budding, but it doesn't have contiguous. And so then I went and looked it up.
Because you would be able to put parking to support that property on this site across from a right-of-way. So there's like
I understand where you're coming from on this, but then when I read I have it up on the screen. So like when I read this, the provisions of this division apply to all commercially zoned properties with frontage on or contiguous to and developed in conjunction with properties with frontage on the following roadways. It's that and. So it's touching, that's contiguous, and developed in conjunction. Well, this has Judd Road in between it, so it's not touching, and it is being developed in conjunction with. But staff reviewed the CPD as a standalone because the master concept plan shows boat display sale areas. You have to, in 34-1352, you have to show the areas of display. So they're showing it on this PD. If this was going to be in conjunction with display sales happening on the triangular piece off-site, that's where people are going to buy boats. And as you testified, Mr. Stewart, the boats are going to be sold, and then I'm going to go into my back stock and replenish. But we treated it, when we were reviewing this, as it's standalone. Case at such time that the applicant wants to sell.
And then, just again, for the record, my conundrum is whether taking the record being open, do I need to request a formal 1572 deviation? Because
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you, Madam Hearing Secretary.
Is there anything further? Okay, we've identified that the record's left open till November 8th, end of business, and we identified what it's being left open for. So if there isn't any further testimony, I will conclude the hearing. And thank you very much.
Thank you.